Washington State architect Kevin Peterson has more than 30 years' experience in providing conceptual design, physical planning, and peer reviews for major transportation projects in complicated urban settings throughout Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas. He played a role in the Seattle Sound Transit Project, the Downtown Olympia Transit Center, the Pierce Transit Centers in Tacoma, and the West Side Corridor Project in Portland. Peterson supports the need for a new crossing, but is critical of the current Columbia River crossing proposal. He presented his alternative design to the leaders of the CRC and Washington State.
Welcome to CUV.com. I'm your host, David Madore. We have Kevin Peterson with us today. Kevin is an international expert on transportation projects. You take on the hard projects and you advise engineers, and you have 30 years experience internationally. And what you have to present today is substantial enough to what appears to be the call to action here is to invalidate the record of decision that has been granted to the CRC light rail tolling project here. Kevin, you presented something of a solution that makes so much sense 2 years ago to the CRC staff, and so far they rejected it. They didn't consider it. What is the problem? Why? What's happening here?
David, the problem with this project is simply the fact that we have two closely spaced interchanges. I-5 through Vancouver has to squeeze multiple interchanges into a very short length of freeway. What has happened is the project office did not consider using a collector distributor as part of a bridge replacement. This is an excerpt from the Washington State Department of Transportation Design Manual. It tells designers when they are designing freeways, they're given two options, David. They're given an option of a grade-separated braided ramp solution that they must consider, or use a collector distributor.
So they're the two very fundamentally different designs that they can consider, and the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act, requires the CRC, any government agency like this, that is considering a major project to consider viable alternatives. And so what we have here is a braided ramp design.
Yes, what currently
versus a CD or a collector distributor design.
The project office is proposing braiding the ramps. Now, in the process of doing that, they use a potpourri of different solutions, but fundamentally their approach is to meet the needs of each interchange by braiding the ramps so that they merge with the freeway within acceptable design standards. Nowhere in the project record did I find that they considered a collector distributor for the bridge replacement. Now, a collector distributor takes all the traffic from the interchanges and puts them on a separate roadway, and then reintroduces that traffic into the freeway beyond that dense pack of interchanges. It's considered quite normal.
Okay, so basically we have a design manual. There is a written guideline that directs the transportation experts within the state here and within both states that directs them to follow these guidelines. And one of those guidelines is that you need to consider...
Chapter 13 of the Washington State Design Manual, page 6, tells you that you have two choices in an urban situation with interchanges spaced closer than a mile apart. Either braid the ramps or use a collector distributor. It further states within chapter 6 or chapter 13, page 6, that you shall consider either frontage roads or collector distributor roads to facilitate the operation of near capacity volumes between closely spaced interchanges.
This is a directive that says you will do this, and has the CRC done this? I mean, this is, at this point, here we are.
I've always assumed that the Washington State Design Manual, Department of Transportation, should be followed when you're doing freeway design.
Right, it's an authoritative source that
directs. It definitely is an authoritative source, and it's well respected around the nation. Why the project office did not consider a collector distributor is what I find disturbing. When I looked at the project in 2010, I could not see that they had considered a collector distributor for a bridge replacement.
You presented this to them.
2010, spring of 2010, I sat down with CRC staff and presented a notional indication of the benefits associated with the collector distributor.
And so they clearly were informed.
Oh, they were clearly informed. They were clearly informed. I assume that they are smart people. They're smart engineers. I assumed at that time that they understood what they were looking at.
Okay, and their response back to you was?
Nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
For how long?
Their response was actually public when they would get questions from their constituents or from other public leaders in the community. Their response was to suggest that there were things wrong with it, but they would never share with me specifically what they considered wrong with the idea.
Okay, let's look at the collector distributor. What is it? Or what are you presenting? What did you present to the CRC staff in contrast to what they ended up approving?
Okay. Well, let's first of all recap some of the benefits associated with the collector distributor.
Okay.
I think it's very, very important for your audience to understand that there's significant benefit that comes if you'd use a collector distributor.
Okay.
So what are some of these benefits? Let's look at this map right now. What you see in yellow, that's the footprint of a collector distributor on this urban landscape if you were to consider it. What you see is a straight freeway alignment. Mm-hmm. You come from north, south, you have a little bend in the freeway here, and it's straight, and a little bend in the freeway when you go over the North Portland Harbor to rejoin I-5 southbound. Mm-hmm. What you avoid with a collector distributor is you avoid this red land take in lower Vancouver, and you avoid this land take within Fort Vancouver. You also significantly reduce the impacts on Hayden Island.
So the red here is the plan that the CRC, that's their plan.
That was their plan in 2010. I understand they've modified it since.
Okay, but basically
it's fundamentally that.
The green here is the current bridge.
Correct.
And this red is bend. The current bridge already has a curve from here to here.
Correct.
But what they're doing is they're amplifying that curve.
Correct.
Here, and they're taking all of this land here and they're encroaching into the reserve here, our National Historic Site, and they're occupying a huge area on Hayden Island and all of this extra interchange here that's going on versus this
simple,
yellow,
straight freeway.
So I know as a product design engineer, when we are moving in the direction of simplicity, we're usually on the right track. We're saving cost, we're saving work. It just, the customer gets a better product in the end.
When I saw that this was the solution, it shocked me. It shocked me to think that they would be continuing to follow the path of braiding ramps when a collector distributor looked like it would have significantly less impact. On Hayden Island, what's that impact? Again, let's go back to 2010. That is the design that they laid before the community. That's the ground level that's lost to Hayden Island with braiding of ramps. This is
massive.
The footprint, the ground level of the freeway if it continues across with a collector distributor, with the collector distributor dropping off to a single point signaled interchange at that point, and then further south merging with I-5.
Okay, and what's all the red on that right image?
Oh, David, this is what's really fantastic for Hayden Island. Each one of these red squares in here, that represents a 200 by 200 foot city block. That's like downtown Portland. That's like downtown Vancouver. That's a city block. What you end up with on Hayden Island is the ability to create a rich, exciting, desirable urban environment that's adjacent to a light rail station that is shielded from the noise of the freeway.
In other words, Hayden Island gets their quality of life back. They get this is the land area that becomes useful to them when with your design, which appears to be simple. If you look at the left image and look at the mass here, and not only does this freeway occupy all this space, but it also the noise and all of the consequences of an
Right.
open freeway like that compared to a simple streamlined design. You get all this livable space back.
Yeah, David,
Right?
what I see within the CRC proposal is a freeway design with some residue urban space left over. And the residue urban space is not enough critical mass of urban land to do anything other than create little parasite, big box retail sort of things. Definitely not a livable urban city that should be part of an urban context if it is served by light rail.
Okay.
You want thousands of people living and working within walking distance of a light rail station, and that simply is not going to happen on Hayden Island with the CRC proposed
So
layout.
Hayden Island, it's a big win for Hayden Island. What about Vancouver?
Well, one other thing I'd like to say here, David,
Okay.
is look at the shore here. There's the opportunity for a wonderful destination park where people from Portland then can come out and walk along the shore of the Columbia River.
Open green space,
And remember,
livable space.
and Hayden Island for years was a destination for people in Portland trying to get away from the hustle and bustle of the urban environment. The old trams that came out to Columbia River, that was, one time Hayden Island was a wonderful recreation destination for the people in Portland.
So here in this case we have a concrete jungle,
Yes.
this massive octopus here of freeway transportation, in contrast to a very manageable, streamlined design and opens livable space for Hayden Island.
Yes, and if anybody wants to see how that is contextually possible, I have a number of studies and sketches that share that. So if anybody's interested in understanding how this works in more detail, more than willing to share
So
that with people.
what we're sharing here is the
We're touching-
overview of
we're-
things.
we're
and
just
you've
hitting the
You've
highlights.
explored this in great detail.
Well, I wouldn't say great detail, but every time an obstacle was put in my path as to why the project office said they couldn't do it, to me it caused me to understand why. So I'm inquisitive. In my world, you have to draw a picture of a statement. So every time something would come back to me from the project office, a rumor I would hear in the media, or I would hear secondhand from someone is they can't do it because there's graves near Fort Vancouver or the airspace at Pearson. I immediately pick up on that and I question whether or not I understand the criteria correctly or not. So I have to investigate it, and my investigation means I have to draw a picture of it to know if it's a true or an untrue concern. So the consequence of that is you create a portfolio of sketch studies that test whether or not these statements are valid or not. Can't draw a picture of it in my world, it doesn't mean anything.
So you need to investigate it, and basically what you're bringing here is scrutiny by an expert, which should be welcomed.
Especially when you consider the benefits. We'll get to the list of those benefits, but let's take a quick look here at Vancouver. To curve the freeway north and go downstream.
So the Vancouver is on the left there,
yeah,
right?
We're looking
north
at
is to the left, right?
North is to the left. Columbia River is through here. The freeway lays itself over Vancouver in a way that I haven't seen a freeway do since the 1960s. You have to go back to the first years of freeways where they were built without real regard or consideration for urban environments to find a prototype that's similar to this.
In other words, this is a towering freeway that actually the design as it was is as it is right now.
This
is 30 feet too low. They're going to raise that up even 30 feet higher, right?
You know, if they have to raise this freeway to accommodate additional clearance on the navigation channel in the Columbia River, it makes what we see on the left probably even worse.
It makes Vancouver known as the city under the bridge.
You know, this is a brutalistic structure that's being laid on top of Vancouver, and the trouble with this is that the brutalistic structure turns its back to Vancouver. So you're looking at the back end of a brutalistic structure. It's like a gorilla sitting in your front yard, and you get to look at the hind end of the gorilla. It's really not at all what I would consider appropriate for any city that wants to be something other than a residue space that was at one time urban and now has a freeway that overwhelms it.
So Vancouver becomes a leftover.
I worry that Vancouver becomes a leftover if it's subjected to this sort of a brutalistic structure.
Okay, you got two images on the screen. You got the left one is what's proposed.
Now, if you go straight,
what's been approved, really.
Right. Now, also back, you notice that there's no lid back in this corner of what the 2010 drawing had. I think the lid connecting Fort Vancouver is very important for connecting Fort Vancouver with Vancouver. But look what happens to the ground level with the collector distributor that goes straight. All of this area opens up between lower Fort Vancouver and lower Vancouver. You have a light rail station here where you can get off the train and walk to Fort Vancouver. You can get off the train and walk to a riverfront promenade that then connects with what I believe is over 2 million square feet of planned development on the riverfront of Vancouver. So what you and also look, in this area, you're able to create a dozen city blocks of viable city activity that's currently under the shadow of a freeway. And the noise, David, the noise, the 60 dBA footprint of this extends well into the city. And in this case, because you're able to employ a rather creative sound barrier, that noise footprint is chopped off very close to the edge of the freeway.
So what you have shown in red here, these are city blocks that are viable, useful, like on Hayden Island.
Like on Hayden Island.
It's basically restoring back to the city the use of this space, the quality of life space, in
right.
contrast to building over this concrete jungle.
Yes.
Where these become shaded, living underneath the bridge.
Yeah, and it recreates the context of Vancouver as Vancouver was originally conceived, a city by the river, a city adjacent to and accessible to Fort Vancouver.
Okay, so we got two basic choices here. Which one makes more sense? This one's been approved, except we have to go back and start over again.
And remember, the one on the left meets the minimal standards of WSDOT.
And is that really our goal here? Are we really...
you know, I talked to the staff at the CRC, the managers at the CRC project office, and they're perfectly content meeting minimal standards. I'm shocked by that attitude, but
I can see that now. Welcome to Vancouver, America. We meet the minimum standards. It's like, come on.
Well, you know,
I'd like to excel. I mean, what's wrong with optimizing our performance? What's wrong with coming up with the best design we can?
I don't understand why there's the reluctance to want to explore a proven way of dealing with interchange of space too closely together to create a wonderful urban environment. I do not understand that mentality. I've never seen it. I go to third world countries and work, help them, advise them. I would never see anything like this. This harbors back to a day where the first lines you draw are the lines that you build, and they don't represent the creative human endeavor that can be applied to a project like this that makes it better.
Good point. Let me just point something out here. If you go back to that for a minute here. Everybody pretty much who has ever heard me speak, they know I'm opposed to light rail. I don't think light rail is appropriate, but even in this case, we're not saying eliminate light rail. This design only works if there's not light rail. You've actually accommodated light rail, heavy rail, any future platform. This serves as a platform for whatever you want, and you provide it a place so it even works for light rail.
You know, if you do not just tag on light rail to a freeway, and you develop the freeway so that it works with light rail, and it respects the function that light rail has to perform, which is placing stations in transit-oriented development communities where thousands of people can live and work within walking distance of the station. You do what we should be doing. And what we'll find...
We should provide livable space right there
adjacent to the transportation network that serves the urban environment.
Okay.
I think that having choices is wonderful. And I'm an advocate of transit, and largely because I work internationally. The vast majority of my work is to put complicated transit systems into complicated urban environments. I believe that 200 years from now, when this bridge is still being used, that future generations will thank us if we create a transportation platform that allows them to exercise options that they need in the future, not just modifying braided ramps, coping with
So
strategies.
it's a platform that lends itself to, you name it, some future transportation solution, this accommodates that.
Commuter rail, possibly high-speed rail, even additional rubber tire traffic, depending on the technologies we employ.
And pedestrians and bikes?
Pedestrian and bikes, yes. So let's continue here.
Okay.
Because what we're getting into is the benefits.
Okay.
And I've summarized the benefits, the obvious benefits of a collector distributor that I see. It reduces the capital cost by $300 to $700 million.
In other words, instead of this costing more, it's actually costing
It
substantially
costs
less.
substantially less. And if I hear that $500 million is the break point for tolling or not tolling, I think it's a tragedy that this option is not being addressed by the project office other than to shun and ignore it. $500 million is a huge amount of labor that a taxpayer base has to provide in order to pay for something that's not needed and actually detrimental.
So you could actually save the enough money on this that the tolling to pay for, I think of the tolling is to pay for light rail.
Well, you don't need to toll, and what you create is more transportation options, and so there's no downside to save $500 million and still accommodate light rail.
So you save money, and that's a substantial amount of money.
And the nice thing about a collector distributor is it meets all the airspace needs, and it provides for 125-foot river clearance.
So it can't be too high to get into the airspace. It can't be too low that you're not going to have enough clearance for river traffic.
It fits the perfect envelope between those two transportation needs.
Since the CRC staff has to go back and revamp, start again, on a design that does accommodate the 125-foot requirement that the U.S. Coast Guard says you got to have at this point, they have to go back and redo their design anyway. Here you've got a design.
David, you said something about simplicity lends itself to a much better solution. Mm-hmm. Yes. If you have a complicated layout, the braiding of ramps, and you have to come back in and make a basic change to that, mm-hmm. Oh, it's impossible. And they will spend tens, if not $100 million redoing what they've done because it's so complicated.
Moving in the direction of complexity is a red flag normally.
Oh,
it says, hey,
especially in transportation, where it's going to be around for hundreds of years. You have to have solutions that readily adapt to future needs.
You build it once and you live with it for a couple centuries.
What's wonderful about a collector distributor is it provides essentially two functions for transportation across the river. It provides for a main line that allows interstate movement to pass through, and it allows on the collector distributor shore-to-shore movements that act as an arterial.
Okay, so far we haven't seen what is a collector distributor.
Well,
you get to it.
Well, I didn't bring pictures of the collector distributor other than just the overview plans.
Okay.
Because if somebody wants to know that, I will certainly share that with them. But this is just the highlights of the issues, right. because David, we do not have 3 hours to go over this. But to continue with the benefits.
Okay.
David, this is something that I think is fundamentally important. This takes in a notion of morality. If you build a collector distributor, you will reduce the numbers of people who will die on this freeway, who will be injured on this freeway. You drop the number of deaths. Is
that an opinion, or is there actually some objective way to predict how many fatalities will be that'll happen as a consequence of this design versus that design? Is there some standard, some formula?
There's volumes of statistical data that correlates complexity of freeways to the number of accidents. When you compare comparable freeway settings, the braided ramp with the back-to-back S-turns that's currently being proposed, where you have grade changes and merging, you have a huge number of conflicts and decisions that drivers have to make. When you have a collector distributor that's a straight alignment, in which the main line does not have any traffic merging with it for miles, you significantly reduce the number of accidents. When I did a comparative evaluation based upon comparables that I think are comparable, I found that the current design may experience slightly less than 1 death a year. If you were to use a collector distributor, the freeway would experience one death every 2.5 years.
So there actually is scientific formulas that you use that will predict the number of fatalities for this design versus that design. And what you are actually talking about is not just simply a more efficient design, a design that has certain benefits.
I'm talking about a
about
measurably safer design. Yeah, in fact, you could make the correlation that if you do the design that's currently proposed without considering the collector-distributor, in other words, you're intentionally deceiving yourself that it does not work. It's the equivalent of someone stopping a car every other year and grabbing an occupant and throwing them into the Columbia River to death.
So it is predictable
It absolutely is predictable.
To save life.
Our departments of transportation have been assembling the statistical data for generations.
And you've walked through, do you actually have numbers on that?
Yes.
Can
Yes.
you show us?
But it's.
Oh, that's right. Okay. So
that's the conclusion.
in other words, you worked through the math. You used the formulas.
Well, David, what I've done is simply look at comparable freeways, accident rates on comparable freeways, and apply that to this situation.
Which is standard to the industry.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I will tell you that most departments of transportation do not like to do this, because then they have choices and decisions that meet their standards and criteria. But if they were to share publicly that one design might save a life every 30 years, well, then it makes it very difficult for them to deal with other situations and issues. So they resist doing this because this is an important aspect of any roadway decision making.
If you can save a life every other year, isn't it negligent not to do that?
I think it's morally repugnant. I think it's a sin if you know that you can save lives, save money, and cause less impacts. Not to consider that, I think that's just morally inept. That's my personal opinion,
Sure.
but I can see that that's certainly not shared by the CRC project office management. Accidents are reduced. With the proposed design, I predict that an accident will happen once every other day. Now it's reduced to once a week with a collector-distributor.
So up here we're talking about fatalities, and down here we're talking about just simply accidents where nobody dies, but you've got an accident.
Well, one out of every 400 or 500 accidents, somebody will die.
Oh.
So they're correlated, but essentially that's what it means.
All right.
And this I find intriguing. People have criticized the current design for not really reducing congestion. But if we look at the main line, straight main line will have significantly fewer fatalities on it.
Can I just, we're talking about collector, distributor, and main line. So basically, what you presented to the CRC 2 years ago was a design that has a double deck, where the bottom layer is the collector distributor.
Yes.
In other words, that's a local freeway, or not a local highway, where it's easy to put accesses to local roads.
Right.
And then above that is your through freeway, so
Right.
that if you don't need to slow down, you don't need to be able to get on and off there, you just simply cruise through. It's like a bypass.
Yes, exactly. And we commonly see that in cities. We commonly do. Seattle employs that. Bellevue employs that. Most major cities employ that around North American continent and the world.
And where do the pedestrians and the bikes go?
They go with the slower traffic, with the arterial movements, more consistent with the city street.
Underneath on the lower level,
You have light rail, you have the collector distributor, and you have pedestrians.
So on one side you have light rail,
Yes.
if they want it, or some other platform they want to be able
Right.
to use. And on the other side you've got
Pedestrians.
And how wide of a space does this allow for that?
For the pedestrians, it would be I like to think that you'd like to separate bicyclists from walking pedestrians.
Okay,
and
so
if you have a wonderful bridge, then you also have something that's more like the Golden Gate experience, where many tourists are drawn to it just to walk over it and enjoy it. So I think you need a significantly wide pedestrian walkway. I think that needs to be 15, 16 feet wide. And you need a bikeway that needs to be able to accommodate two-way movement on that. So that needs to be 12, 14, 15, 16 feet wide. So I think there's a lot of credence that can be given to wanting to maximize the pedestrian accessibility on this bridge.
Okay, so you've accommodated light rail, any other platform that they want, pedestrians, bikes. You provided a easy way to get on and off locally, and that's probably what, a 45-mile-an-hour speed limit.
I like the number 45.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's consistent with the ramp speeds that you would need to access that. So it makes sense just to hold the same speed across the collector distributor.
Okay. All right, and which means you've got less accidents. What else we got?
Yeah, and David, what I found, I don't have the slide here, but I found that on the main line of the freeway, whereas now we have an accident every other day on that's going to impede movement of people. Congestion is caused by accidents. That if you reduce that, on the main line of the freeway, you may only experience an accident cost congestion delay maybe twice a month. From every other day to twice a month.
An accident every other day
Yeah.
is what the current design is predicting to.
Well, I don't know what they're predicting, but that's what my statistical evaluation leads me to believe. And I certainly wish that they would tell me where I'm wrong. All I hear from them is they meet the minimum standards.
Okay.
So David, they truly don't want to understand this option, the management of the CRC project.
And I'm wondering why.
Because reason why is I think that they've just found a solution that met the minimum standards, and that's all the communities require. Well, that's all all communities requiring of them. Is they just want a bridge that meets minimum standards and start building the thing because jobs come out of it. I don't know why I would want to do that.
I like the idea of jobs on any project that makes sense.
Oh, yes, and that's what's so frustrating is that if you consider the collector distributor, it makes nothing but sense. 2 million square feet of urban context, be it parks, be it city streets, be it environmentally sensitive land, that's what's unnecessarily needed to do this braided ramp solution. And the collector distributor, I found it takes less space than I-5 currently occupies.
That's hard to believe.
It's almost as if it's a miracle, but it's simply applying a collector-distributor philosophy to the 3 interchanges that adjoin the Columbia River and putting that collector-distributor on a bridge.
Okay, what else we got?
Oh, we save 3 dozen blocks from loud noise. It's urban blocks. We see how Hayden Island can evolve into a real delightful place to live and work. 35 to 40 contiguous city blocks of parks, shops, urban activities.
Which is huge. I mean, in that case, that's the Hayden Island is a small island. That amount of useful space returned back to the citizens.
And it's really the only place on the Oregon side of the Columbia River where you can have a rich urban experience at the river edge. Same as Vancouver is the only urban place in Washington on the northern edge of the Columbia River where you can have a rich urban experience adjoining the river.
So green space, quietness,
just shops, promenading, go the weekend with your date to go down to the Columbia River and walk along the shoreline and see a beautiful bridge that's just as magnificent as the Golden Gate Bridge is, and it's part of your community. Wow, I think that would be nice.
I would think it'd be nice if we considered that.
Well, David, and here's a technical issue that really grates at me. If a collector distributor is employed, it saves 100 to 130,000 square feet. Takes less, 100 to 130,000 square feet less out of the Fort Vancouver context than the current proposal does, that takes. So it reduces the impacts on Fort Vancouver significantly. Now, one of the reasons why I think the project office does not want to seriously consider this idea is because if they were to acknowledge that this is a possibility, remember to date they've said it doesn't work, there's too many problems with it, it shall not be considered, and besides, it's now too late. We've already have a record decision. They can obfuscate on their obligation to follow federal law. And the 1966 Transportation Act tells us that if we have a credible alternative put forward that reduces the impact on national parks, the project has to consider that.
Okay, so that's a requirement from the federal law.
That's a federal law.
The Fort Vancouver is a national park.
Right.
And so the CRC office was supposed to follow that. They're not compliant.
I believe they're not compliant. I believe they're negligent. I wonder why the federal government is ignoring what they're doing, and mainly because, and in all sense respect for the federal government only hears what the project office tells them about this project. So as long as they can deny this possibility exists, they can deny an informed understanding of this alternative within the federal government.
In other words, the higher-ups, the state legislatures, the Congress, the governors, they're all assuming, or even our local representatives are assuming that the CRC project office is being transparent, they're being honest, they're being truthful, they're not hiding any cards, they're showing the cards out in the open. Is that the case?
I think they're assuming a lot of things based upon the information fed to them by the project office. And I believe a majority of that information when it comes to the collector distributor, if not all of that information, is false and in error. The other benefits that continue is Fort Vancouver. Fort Vancouver is able to reconnect with Vancouver, where it traditionally reconnected near the village of historic Vancouver. And it reconnects with the river. And I'll show you some implications on the long-range planning for Fort Vancouver that can really optimize that relationship in a minute.
Great.
Again, the LRT in Lower Vancouver is a short walk from the fort. Mm-hmm. Imagine, once again, being able to take light rail out to the river and enjoy a walk in the park.
Or to be able to ride your bike across or walk across.
And be proud of the fact that it's a wonderful urban environment. And, you know, 3rd Street becomes an important connector in Vancouver.
So it knits our city back together.
Yeah, and the nice thing about a straight alignment, if you have wide shoulders and you look at a future where transportation technology gets more efficient and smarter, you have the ability to increase capacity in 30, 40, 50, 60 years to 12,000 vehicles per hour per direction and maintain the light rail line. You can also add additional light rail, commuter rail line, maybe high-speed rail on the top, and still hold something like 9,000 vehicles per hour per direction vehicle capacity.
In other words, what you have is something that takes a less footprint, costs less money, it knits together Hayden Island, so you have quality of life in Hayden Island and in Vancouver, and actually moves substantially more traffic, saves lives. Are there other benefits?
We'll continue. And again, I like the idea of a transportation platform that really gives our children and our children's children a transportation platform that will be able to be modified to meet the transportation needs.
It gives you flexibility for the future.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And that is, I have to tell you, when you're building a bridge that's going to last 200 years, they say it'll last 100 years, but if you look, say, back at the Brooklyn Bridge in New York, it's certainly going to be around for 300 years. So this bridge will be with this community for at least 200 years.
Sure. And if you look at the existing I-5, the first leg was built in 1917, which is over 100 years ago.
Right.
Second one in 1957. And according to ODOT, they haven't taken down their website yet that says it's good for many decades to go.
You know, it's true. I agree that the issue of seismic could have been mitigated in a way that was not, I think, honestly represented by the project office. I do, however, David, think that the freeway design, what the designers conceived back in 1917 and 1953, I think it was, when they were designing it, was really of an era that really was not safe for people in cars. We've learned so much since that time that I think, knowing that those bridges ultimately have to be replaced, we may get 50 more years out of them.
Eventually, sometime in the future.
Right.
But right now, there are no safety limitations on it.
Well, there are. It's a dangerous bridge if you look at the accident rates and how it actually impedes commerce within the area. I do think that it makes sense to replace the bridge.
Or you can leave that historic bridge there as a local road. And add a freeway bypass to it, right?
Yes, and since we're talking about a rich pedestrian environment near the river, I've been involved in a number of bridge projects where we have had to replace historic bridges with with newer bridges. And what we've tried to do is create a landscape where we save parts and pieces of the old bridge in order to facilitate a better pedestrian access to the waterfront in the area. And I think there's ways that you can preserve the integrity of the historic attributes of the bridges and enrich the pedestrian environment. But I do think that as far as a crossing of the river, I think commerce and industry suggests that we do have to replace those bridges with something that's going to be viable for the next couple hundred years.
So if we do replace that bridge, then you want to replace it with something that not just meets minimum standards. You want to replace it with something that moves us forward in the direction of quality of life, efficiency, all of that.
All the things that should be demanded if you put a freeway in an urban context. Oh, environmental. Presently, I think that if you include North Portland Harbor and the Columbia River, that something like 23 to 33 in-water disturbances are required for braiding the ramps, the current design.
So you've got supports that go into the river, concrete that's just disturbing. You've got lots of supports.
Yeah, a lot of temporary
23 to 33 in water.
Coffer dams, barges tied up, sediment disturbances, things like that. If you do a straight alignment, you actually drop the number of in-water disturbances from between 7 and 10.
From 23 to 33, 7 to 10.
Yeah.
So you're environmentally, it's substantially
If
better.
this community values environmental impacts, and I think this community should,
absolutely,
then I do not understand why we do not see people like the Sierra Club or other groups that are actually dedicated to reducing the adverse impacts of human presence. I do not know why we do not see more interest from those groups. It's most disturbing about
so
that.
You have
We're disturbed by
viable design. Okay, so so far that's plenty. Have you got any more?
Well, we reduce the shadows on the river by 25%.
Which is important when it comes to the environmental impact.
We have fish habitat along the shores, and anything we can do to reduce that shadow benefits that fish habitat. And we have a bridge that we can be proud of, David. We have a bridge that people will visit Vancouver to experience, instead of wanting to move through a forgotten urban landscape. So they were presented with this 2 years ago. Why was this not considered?
You've obviously asked them that question.
Yeah.
I mean, multiple times.
And I've even last year formally, through public records disclosure, asked them what they did with respect to reviewing the idea.
Well, Kevin, I expect that, I don't know what they say, but I imagine, I could be wrong, that here we've got somebody that comes in, you've got one idea, and they've got a myriad of ideas, and you're just one more member of the public with all these ideas. They've considered all those things, and the time has passed, time to move on, build the bridge. Isn't that what they're going to say?
They've told state legislators that it's not their business to respond to every idea that comes to them on the back of a bar napkin. When legislators ask them if they had considered this idea.
That sounds reasonable. Is that what this is?
Well, that's obviously the response that was given to a state legislator by WSDOT when asked why they did not consider this. When I made a public records request, and they disclosed that they really didn't review it, and we'll look at that in just a minute.
Okay.
The one thing that they did do.
All right.
Ann Rivers asked me if I would make a presentation to a panel of state legislators in Olympia.
When was that?
It was, I believe, August of this year, or December of this year.
Okay, so State Representative Ann Rivers wants to make sure that the state legislature understands has their eyes open on this project.
Right.
So she invited you to come present to the legislature.
Right.
Legislators.
And it was a committee. It was maybe a half dozen or so. So it was basically the regional representatives that are concerned about this project.
Okay.
And then the legislators were reassured by WSDOT that they had considered the idea. So I received this letter dated December 9th, shortly after that early December presentation. And
so December 9 of last year, this is before or after your presentation to the legislators?
immediately following the presentation.
Okay. So this is from...
This is from the two directors of transportation in
so
the
we
state
have
of...
one person that's responsible for transportation in Washington. That's the director of transportation in Washington. That's Paula Hammond.
Right. And then we have Matthew Garrett, who's the director of the Oregon Department of Transportation. They sent me this letter with, and you'll notice it's Columbia River Crossing letterhead.
Yep.
And they made some statements in here which I find fascinating. They said an upstream straight alignment for the bridge, for the replacement bridge, as you have suggested, was among those considered. David, it was not. They never considered a collector distributor with a bridge replacement for this project.
When they say it's been considered,
as you have suggested, was among those considered.
In other words, they're basically saying, looked at it, investigated it to the point where we have confidence that it's not viable or we have a better design.
No, they said that they considered it in the past.
Okay.
They did not.
So it's a false statement.
It's a false statement. Your concepts have been thoroughly considered in the course of the project's alternatives analysis and reviewed specifically by both project engineers and independent industry experts. The ideas you are suggesting have been found to provide fewer benefits and more negative impacts than the CRC design. And what we just saw on benefits makes this statement most odd. It's as if they'd never, ever even looked at it. After a rigorous technical and public process, in the last sentence, sorry, neither the bridge review panel nor CRC staff were able to identify a compelling reason to reconsider an upstream alignment and collector distributor system for the river crossing.
So they're saying they're considered, and then they say they're thoroughly considered, and they have a
David, they have a finding of fact.
I'm not familiar with the official terminology of what
the ideas you are suggesting have been found to provide fewer benefits.
Okay, so
there's a finding of fact.
The director of transportation, the top people responsible for transportation projects in both states make these statements to the legislators who are responsible for funding this project.
No. This statement was made to me.
Okay.
This was a letter written by the two directors of transportation to me.
Okay.
They might have thought I was hanging out in bars drawing on too many napkins and I might be better put in place. But it was written to me.
How that might make you feel.
No, it's fine. I was honored that they would write me a letter. But I think what's significant about this letter is the letterhead.
Yeah.
This letter originated in the CRC project office. I would rather imagine that it was written by the managers of the CRC project office for the signatures of Paula Hammond and Matthew Garrett.
To give it credibility, which it does. These are positions of authority. These are charged with responsibility. And when you sign this, this is a true statement.
Right.
I put my credentials on the line.
So what I see here is, unfortunately, I see that the two directors of transportation have been co-opted by misinformation from their project office. I may be wrong, I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I conclude when I look at this letter.
Okay, so here we have obviously false statements. How do you know that? How do you?
Because of a public records request asking them to share with me the review of this idea.
So you requested, what did you request?
We requested information on the review of a collector distributor that I put forward to them.
Okay, when did you do that?
I did it twice. I did it last summer and after I received this letter.
And what did they send you?
One small preliminary geometric assessment. This was the only information brought forward by the public records request that the project office considered a collector distributor. This was a review of the SR-14 interchange, a very early conceptual sketch of the interchange that was notional that I presented to the CRC project office in 2010. Now, David, I have to say something here. I think what happened is they gave this sketch to an engineer and said, please show me or share with me what you think might be wrong with this layout. And the engineer dutifully went about sharing what they thought was wrong, potentially wrong, with that layout. So they've identified a number of things that were potentially wrong with an interchange layout, complicated, based on a sketch. Problem is that none of those concerns are real. And immediately upon receipt of that information, which mind you, they prepared that in the fall of 2010, never shared it with anybody, stuffed it in a file, and only through a public records request did it come to me. So it was never volunteered to me as a response for the review that they did of the collector distributor. They secretly put it into a file, secret relative to me, without my knowledge, and then that's what they considered to be that thorough review that we read about in Paula Hammond's and Matthew Garrett's letter.
The rigorous evaluation.
Yes, and you know, if people can scroll back through this video, go back and read those words that were excerpt from that letter.
Yep.
Now here's what I find a tragedy about that. After summer was over, I went back in and asked myself, well, goodness, what did they get wrong? When they did this geometric assessment, here you see a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
On the left, you see the collector distributor, and on the right, you see braided ramps.
This is the braided ramps is with the CRC design.
Correct.
This is your design over here.
Right, right. The items in red are those that are at the minimum standard that WSDOT puts forward in their design manual.
Okay.
You'll see on the braided ramps only 2 ramp movements I consider to be correct.
In this one, yeah.
Not the minimum.
Yeah. So basically,
And when I look at the collector distributor, I only see 1 movement that's at the minimum of the standard. Right. But more importantly, David, they completely missed the connections that a collector distributor adds to Vancouver. They simply do not connect suburban communities north of Vancouver with lower Vancouver.
Can you show that?
The current design, if you're north of Vancouver and you're wanting to access the waterfront area, and remember that includes the proposed waterfront development, which is maybe a couple million. I'm not sure how many square feet proposed, but I think it's a couple million square feet of mixed-use development.
Future development?
You have to get off at Mill Plain. And then you need to filter across what Vancouver wants to be as a rich pedestrian environment with light rail running down the streets. You're simply not allowed to get off I-5 and connect with lower Vancouver. It is a connection that's missing in the current scheme. If we do a collector distributor, then we are able from northbound I-5 to get off and connect with that future riverfront development and then get back on northbound I-5. That means that we are not putting all of that traffic
through the heart of the city.
Through the heart of the city, through what I hope is a rich pedestrian environment. So they did a review of they did a geometric assessment of one interchange, but never bothered to ask themselves what might be good about this. Now, since you are part of Vancouver, let me focus in on what's this attitude or approach that I am suggesting, which is more of a comprehensive look towards how transportation facilities can better serve the future needs of our population. Fort Vancouver. What we see up here is braided ramps as currently proposed. Vancouver does get a connection.
If they put a lid over there.
If they put a lid over it, which, you know, probably they will do. But you'll see that all along separate, and this is the Columbia River, that SR 14, this complicated geometry, that's this interchange, up to the lid and then beyond the lid, that's still a barrier that separates Fort Vancouver from Vancouver and the river.
Okay.
But if
which is the current CRC design.
That's the current. That's as good as it's ever going to get with the current design.
Okay.
Okay. But if you say, how can we exploit a collector distributor to reconnect Fort Vancouver with the river, Fort Vancouver with Lower Vancouver, what you see down here is a cross section. The idea is to take the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, put it on a viaduct structure. And we're talking future generations here. We're not talking next year or 10 years from now. We're talking about maturing an urban environment to be a delightful place to live for our children and grandchildren. Maybe underneath there you get a bicycle way. And SR 14, for a short distance, because it has slower speeds on the collector distributor, maybe 45 miles an hour, it becomes a parkway. And we keep the speeds low. Maybe for a short distance it's 35 miles an hour. Maybe on the weekends it's brought down to 25 miles an hour and we have multiple pedestrian crossings across there. Rather like how an arterial should coexist when it's in the heart of an important park. What you then end up with is you end up, Fort Vancouver's up on this side, you end up visually connecting the fort with the river's edge and bringing that river edge experience back across into the fort. So there's wonderful betterment that this community can take from this idea that they don't even know they can take.
And during the peak or rush hour, basically, then you have the 14 here, which is normal speeds, just simply to maximize your efficiency.
We really don't use our parks early in the morning all that much in the weekdays because we're all working. So we bring the speed back up a little bit during those times to make it an efficient transportation network.
So basically, paying attention to our local heritage, our identification. Who are we and what's our claim to fame here? What is the unique about Vancouver?
You have to always want to exploit that. That is what makes the place special. You have to celebrate that. If you do not celebrate, if you just simply go along with what this braided ramp thing is, you destroy it.
We have, what, 1 million or more people a year come to tour the fort and this officer's row in this area, which is really...
Let's make that 2 million. Let's make this a place, this whole waterfront experience, something that people want to celebrate.
This is us. This is our identity.
It's, yeah, I don't live here.
Part of it.
It's your
heritage.
community.
Sure.
It's your heritage. It is unfortunately not being respected with what's going on. It does come down to the people of this community to demand that this project consider things that it refuses to consider.
You know, just talk about that for a minute. We hear these terms, locally preferred alternative. It implies that the people in our community, that our community supports this. In reality...
David, the community was never given this choice. As far as the project office is concerned, this does not exist as an alternative. The locally preferred alternative was just simply forced onto this public because they were never informed there was any other option. What you have is a situation where people are defaulting to what the bureaucracy is telling them they must default to because they were given no choice. If you give people a choice, if this collector distributor is offered to people as a choice, I'm sure this would be the preferred local alternative. But they were denied that choice, David. They were denied this opportunity by a project office that I do not understand why they do what they do.
Kevin, I wonder about the process. The NEPA process requires the viable alternatives to seriously be considered. And not only do you have
specifically the 1966 Transportation Act relative to Fort Vancouver tells me that this project office is not operating correctly by denying this possibility exists.
Well, rather than point to the bureaucrats that are living in this office space downtown as though they had autonomy to be able to do whatever they wanted to do, I think we ought to look at the local representatives, because the local representatives are the ones charged with the responsibility.
David, there's no choice, and I've got some addresses and names that follow here in a minute. There's no choice. The project office shut their door to this idea 2 years ago. December, we saw that they co-opted the two directors of transportation, Oregon and Washington, to essentially present me with false statements in a letter. We do not see this project office responsive to anything other than what it wants to do.
But still, am I being too idealistic, thinking that that we have county commissioners, we have city council members, we have state representatives, we have congressmen, and women that are...
One of the interesting things that came out of the public records disclosure was you got to see who in the community actually was interested. Do you know there's only one citizen in the community that formally requested the CRC project office look at this? That was the mayor of Portland. Excuse me, the mayor of Vancouver. Tim Levitt wrote a couple letters to the project office and said, basically said, this probably is a good idea. I want to know why it doesn't work, why you're not considering it.
So Tim Levitt actually did a good thing. He wrote a letter to the project office that
says he has the only correspondence in the record of information pertaining to the review that suggests a public official questioned. So
he questioned?
Well, he was assured by the project office that I was wrong, they were right, and that was the end of it.
Okay. Which, is that true?
Well, what we just saw here...
Obviously not.
Well, it's obvious that it's not, but when you have a project office that simply wants to present false understanding of an issue, it's very hard for anyone to take action unless it's directed towards those people who represent their interests, and that's our elected representatives. And since the project office appears to have co-opted both departments of transportation, and I call this a lie, then
it's certainly not the truth.
Well, if it's intentional deception, it's still a lie.
Yeah.
It requires the citizens to ask their representatives why this idea has been shunned by the project office and why this intentional deception has occurred, why they won't consider the idea. Now look at this. Look at this, David. This is a simple arch bridge, straight alignment, 2 levels that spans the Columbia River. It has a 125-foot vertical clearance and a 500-foot wide navigation channel towards the center of the river.
So that not only does it have the right elevation here, the right head clearance for the river traffic, but it also has plenty of width left to right, open channel for large vessels to go through.
And to the right, you see that first span over the water, and that has enough clearance in there for the majority of barge traffic to hug the shore as they move up and down the Columbia River.
Which is important because just 1 mile west is the turnstile for the Burlington Northern Railroad.
Yes.
That if you're going to shoot through there,
So
it gives you a straight shot.
Right, so the vast majority of river traffic can be accommodated with that straight shot. At some point in the future, that railroad trestle will be replaced. At that time, it can be shifted over to align with this bridge, and we can have a much safer, better navigational
And
channel.
so the design that you have here accommodates not only efficient flow now and accommodates that turnstile the way it is, hugging the North Shore, but it also accommodates in the future when that over 100-year-old railroad bridge gets a lift span added to it.
It's remarkable what you can do if you have a straight bridge and you can employ long span bridge technology contrasted to a curved bridge that must rely on medium span bridge types to do the job.
There's a beauty in simplicity, and all the benefits start falling out. That's like we get this and this and this and this when you get on the right track. And Kevin, it looks like you're on the right track. This is not just another design drawn on a napkin that gets thrown out with a myriad of other things. It's basically a very viable design. It makes the current CRC project look sophomorish. Has the project office, have they actually built bridges before? Have they actually constructed freeways like this before? Why are we in this spot? This is after the record of decision.
We're in this spot because I really don't know, David. I do know that the few professionals that have worked on the project, they've all told me that if you go contrary to what the CRC project office wants, you will not work on the project. We saw an interesting correspondence within the public records disclosure that actually included Paula Hammond. When they were saying that the bridge review panel reviewed this idea, I asked Tom Warren as chairman of the bridge review panel, if his group actually reviewed the idea. And he said, no, we were not charged with reviewing any ideas brought forward other than what the project office brought forward. But then he went on to say that the problem with the project is the closely spaced interchanges. And Tom pointed out, as I had pointed out, that the majority of cities in the world are moving away from what we're seeing the project office doing.
And Paula Hammond's response?
Paula Hammond's response was that Tom Warren's comment threatened the status quo, raised doubt on what the project office was doing, and Tom Warren's comment put him out of favor within WSDOT.
Isn't that the task of a review panel? To question, to scrutinize, to evaluate, and to suggest alternatives and improvements? Or are they commissioned to be yes men?
No. In all fairness, the bridge review panel was charged with reviewing the bridge. Remember, when the bridge review panel was brought together, I was asked to present a collector-distributor scheme to bridge experts. That was not an appropriate thing to do. My use of a collector-distributor should have been brought to a group of experts who understand freeway design, not bridges. Many people in that panel were people who understand substructures of bridges or a scour within riverbeds pertaining to tangent piles or pile construction. These were technical people that knew bridges. They did not know freeways. So it was inappropriate to ask them to do that. And indeed, I heard from members of the panel immediately after that presentation I made that the CRC project office staff told them they could not review that because that's not what they were asked to do. They were asked to review the bridge.
Don't look at the big picture. Don't give us anything. Just simply commission them. I find it really hard to imagine how people can think this way because it seems to violate common sense and logic and efficiency and innovative and solutions and think outside the box kinds of leadership.
We can wonder that, but the simple facts are that this project office failed to consider the benefits inherent with the collector distributor. There's a couple negatives associated with the collector distributor. One of them is it probably is not cost effective to put an active fire suppression system on the lower deck, which means you would not allow flammable tanker trucks across. You know, if you had a gasoline delivery one side of the island or one side of the 3 intersection area, you would have to route that around.
In other words, if you've got flammable vehicles carrying flammable fluids, whatever, you stay on the freeway,
right,
on the top.
Right, and you'd have to backtrack down, so you'd probably have to add a mile to your journey. And the other negative is you do have to re-merge the collector distributor with the main line. And how that's done usually suggests something like this. You have the 3 lines of the main line in one direction and the 2 collector distributors. When you bring them together, you have 5 lanes that then you have to bring down to 4, and down in Portland area, probably down to 3 on the short term.
And down to 2 at the Rose Quarter. They're
and
not
down
fixing
to 2
this on this design.
Right,
Leaves
right.
that bottleneck right there.
It does, and that's the bottleneck is a problem in the future. But I will say, with respect to I-5 and that bottleneck, is I've not seen any urban environment desirous of building new freeways over new landscapes in order to accommodate a dysfunctional existing freeway. It's inevitable, in my opinion, although it's going to meet with significant resistance, that you will improve the throughput of I-5 to make sense against the improvements of I-5 north and the improvements that ODOT is doing to the south. It is inevitable. It does not make sense in my mind to build new freeways. So I think that there is going to have to be a more expensive solution developed through the Rose Quarter and through downtown Portland. And I would like to see that coupled with maybe a creative way of dealing with 405. And there's many ways of dealing with it, but that takes a longer term perspective. And I only wish that I was asked to help formulate what that solution might be, because whatever that solution is, it needs to work within the context that is the urban character of Portland.
That's a word you don't hear very much, and this is the character of this. Well, Kevin, anytime we discuss anything like this, the question comes at the end, so what? What do we do?
So what? Well, let's make our representatives earn their pay. Let's ask them why they're either disinterested in understanding this or if they're interested in understanding this. And maybe the community will ask that an action be taken. So we have 2 senators, Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell. I've tried to contact both of them. I've actually met with their staff on a couple occasions, and when I have met with their staff, I was listened to, but nobody would follow through or get back to me.
So they're aware of this problem?
Certain of their staff are, but you know, the 2 senators, though, they have many things to deal with, so only the information that flows through their staff to them reaches them.
Well, I would think a $10 billion project, the largest project in the history of southern Washington, would merit their attention.
I would think so too. And so I would encourage people to contact these senators and simply ask them why the project office is refusing to consider the benefits of a collector distributor.
I would suggest at this point, because that we ask and demand, really, to push the stop button, to push the pause button and say, wait a minute, they're already drilling holes in Hayden Island.
Well, those are exploratory holes for testing things. And
they're still spending millions of dollars each month on this.
Yeah, no, David, the geotechnical investigation that goes along with an alignment and choice like this is a huge investment, because you do not want engineers designing things that they do not understand where they're going to go. And the only way that you know what's going to happen with the earth is to open up parts of it and find out what's there.
But you need to know where to drill.
Well, that's just it. We're drilling in the wrong places. We're drilling in the wrong places. Oops. Okay, so the 2 senators. But quite frankly, I've been disappointed with the lack of interest that their staff has shown on this.
Okay, are there others?
Yeah, Jamie Herrera.
Okay.
Now, Jamie Herrera staff has told me that they are very interested in hearing from their constituents about this issue.
She's concerned about what this is going to do to our community in the future.
Yes, she is the only national representative that I've talked to that seems to care.
And one of the things that really the CRC project office and those that are promoting this, that just wanted to go, just get the money flowing, just get the money flowing, just keep the money flowing. That seems to be the goal of this. What they're counting on is that citizens aren't really going to take the time. The citizens are going to be lazy. Citizens are not going to pay attention. In reality, if ever we had the call to action,
well, David,
this is it.
Right.
This is the time to call, to contact, to write a snail mail letter.
Yes, write them.
And say, stop this nonsense.
Yes, and David, that's what's so unfortunate, is we have these departments of transportation and the federal government essentially seconding staff from both of these state departments of transportation to create an independent project office. What we don't see is we don't see a sense within that project office that they really want to better the places that they're making this disturbance in. People think when you have a project office and you staff them with engineers that they are going through a process to make the right decision. They are going through a process, but they are going through a process to meet the minimum standards to move a project forward.
Yeah.
I discovered that when you look at a collector distributor, as they should have if they followed the design manual, they would have found huge benefit. That's presupposing that they have the ability to translate those words into an active design. That's my job around the world, is people say we have this need, we have these pieces of criteria, how do we physically fit this? And that's probably what's lacking. The project staff is largely technicians or skilled managers, but I haven't seen anybody in there that really has a good understanding of how to translate criteria into a design.
Anytime you got a very significant dysfunction, a huge problem that's evolved over a period of time, and it's become it's to the point where we are now, there are multiple, quite often there are multiple things that go wrong. And one of the things that I just wonder, I don't understand, why in the world would our city councils, why in the world would our county commissioners, why would C-Tran give their stamp of approval and say, we approve this project, well, just send it on forward and move to construction?
Because there are dozens of managers and engineers that are assuring them that they are doing everything possible to create the best project.
At this point, if they are really charged with that responsibility, they're going to fulfill that responsibility. If anything that you say here has credibility, if this is the truth, then they don't have an excuse at this point. They need to, David, these local representatives need to speak on behalf of the people that said to say, stop the presses, stop funding this boondoggle.
Right. And David, I talk about a sense of moral bankruptcy that might be happening when I know that people will be unnecessarily killed. I don't like that. That keeps me wanting to pursue this, even to a point where it has a profound impact on my professional career. You should not do these things.
Sure. And this is not only you as a professional. You understand the implications. You understand the professional side of this.
My profession is subordinate to my responsibilities as both a citizen of this country and as a human with a conscience.
And we as citizens of this community also bear that responsibility, that we need to participate in the process. And there are times when it makes sense for us to speak up. And this is one of those times.
This is absolutely one of those times. Jamie Herrera would like to hear from as many people as are interested in this as she can. She sits on the Transportation Committee. She's uniquely in the position to question what has occurred. She has told me, or her staff has told me, that they really cannot act upon what I'm telling her because I'm not part of her, she does not represent me. I'm outside of her district. she needs to hear from people within her district. She needs
That's
to
us.
hear that. That's yeah.
And I also believe that's our city councils. Our
Well,
city councils need to pass a resolution that say,
Yeah,
hey,
so-
that this is not right. We speak for the local citizens. Push that pause button, review this, stop the presses. Our county commissioners
Right.
need to pass a resolution that says, we do not support this project for these reasons.
Yeah, absolutely contact Jamie, but get a hold of your state representatives, because remember, this project uses staff seconded from WSDOT. WSDOT essentially was delegated the responsibility with ODOT to staff, bring their management philosophy, bring other aspects of how they do business to this project. Your state senator and your state representatives, they need to be contacted. Ann Rivers asked me to present what I knew in front of a select group of legislators that she assembled. That's what resulted in that letter from the two directors of transportation. These people need to know that if they take an action, that if their cares and concerns about their community, they need to know that those cares and concerns represent the desires of the people they represent.
Yes. So if ever we're going to write a letter, old-fashioned letter, write it and send it to individuals, this is the time. And these are the individuals in the contact information. It may take 20 minutes or half hour to write once, because this is we're talking about saving people's lives. This is about our character of our community, our future.
I think when I compared the cost to the taxpayers, if this additional $500 million were to be borne by the citizens of Ann or Jamie Herrera's district, that it really constitutes all of a year of everyone, all of the taxes that they pay to state
that will pull
and
that out of
federal.
our local economy.
That basically strips that away. That means the labor of all the working population and all the contributions that they make to the public good with the taxes that they pay for about a year, and I could be wrong there, so I encourage an economist to check that. All of that is for naught. All of that's to do something that's worse than what's currently there. When you could save that and end up with something that's much better. If a person values their time, they need to send a letter. If they don't, then they must accept the fact that they will work another year to pay taxes that are going to something that really provides no value. I'd much rather see that go to schools. I would much rather see that go to other roads. I would much rather see that go to help people that are in need. Not something that's ultimately going to be bad for the community.
Sure. We need to be able to prosper and thrive. And that doesn't happen with just barely making standards. That happens when we engage and we end up doing the right thing, going the second mile, sacrificing our time to make our community a better place. Now's the time.
Yes.
Kevin, you volunteered your time to do all this as a responsible citizen. And you don't even live in this community. Thank you.
Oh, I live in the community of transportation facilities
live in
around
our
the
state.
world.
That's
And I
right.
live in the state. No, to not change this project would be an embarrassment that I would have to live with when I go overseas. It's, oh, you come from that state, they built the CRC project, huh? Yeah.
Well,
no, David, it's an issue that does have to be dealt with.
So I would say, community, let's send hundreds of letters to these addresses. Let's make our voice heard. Let's stop. Let's hold the money. Let's consider making decisions that make sense for our future. Please. And thank you.
You're welcome.